All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Diego, for joining us. A quick housekeeping note. So we've got both a Q&A and a chat. If you have questions that you'd like to have Diego answer at the end, please put them in the Q&A and upvote other people's questions in the Q&A. The chat is open because we want to keep this interactive, and if you want to share resources, comments, etc., we want to keep that there. But if you put a question in the chat, we may not see it. It may not get answered. So there you go. We got our first question in the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end. But Diego, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us as part of Climate Career Week. You are the co-founder, CEO of Pachama, which is a leading company doing MRV and marketplace for nature-based carbon removal. And you also come from a non-climate background. We're working with a bunch of people who are interested in getting into the climate space and are excited to hear your story. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone who's joining the call. And yeah, it's a pleasure to help bring more people into the climate cause. You guys have been doing an incredible job at that, and hopefully my story can serve to some, and hopefully I can give a couple of actionable tips.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we'll hop right into it. So you and I actually met via email many years ago when neither of us were working in climate. You were on your, I think, second startup. Your first startup was a software startup that was acquired. And then you pioneered the smart luggage trend that is, still a big thing now. And obviously, you did not come from the type of background that a lot of people assume that you need to have an impact in climate. Can you tell us a bit about your personal journey from being a tech founder to being a climate tech founder?
For sure, happy to share that. And yes, it's amazing how life journeys intersect in different stages, right? But yeah, I guess to start, I am originally from Argentina. I grew up in the north of Argentina in an area with beautiful forests. So just being born near the forest, I think kind of qualifies me to work to defend them. But truly, I didn't study nor started my career on anything related to climate, nature, carbon, sustainability whatsoever. I studied electromechanics and then business, went to do my master's in project management to Barcelona, Spain. And then an internship led me to the US, to New York. And when I was in New York, I had this desire to get involved into the entrepreneurial scene and into the technology world. Always in the back of my head, I was aware and worried about the state of the environment and how we were, treating the planet and climate change, of course. But it was only after 10 years in the travel technology industry that I had this moment of what I call eco-awakening, a moment of realization that this was, the biggest problem that civilization would face in the next century, and that any other problem that I may be working on was irrelevant if we couldn't solve that one. In these two companies, I was a co-founder and CEO. The first company got acquired by a big travel company, and I went and I joined as a VP of product, helping them build mobile apps. And in the second company also got acquired, and I didn't join the company that acquired it. And there is where I decided to take a sabbatical to really think what I wanted to do with my life next. And that was the moment in which I started really first looking inside of myself. What was that I was being called to do? Probably this coincided with the beginning of a midlife crisis, right? In which I think we all ask ourselves, what is our purpose? What are we doing here, in our life? What is going to be our legacy, right? So with that spiritual and philosophical, search, is that I also try to make sure that my next professional step would be one aligned with a higher sense of purpose. And there is where, climate and the environment was at the top of my worries. But, as you said, not coming from that world, I did have a good deal of imposter syndrome, asking myself, who am I to try to, start something in climate? In fact, during the time, I actually applied. I sent my resume to a few conservation NGOs. I never heard back from them. We're working with some of them now at Pachama. But, I then after thinking about it, I actually realized that almost every innovation in every industry comes from outsiders or from a combination of outsiders and insiders, right? That applies to, space exploration all the way to fintech and everything in between, right? So I actually set up to get smarter and to see, okay, what were areas, ideas, assumptions that I could validate by talking to people. And I spent months reaching out, reading books, reaching out to the authors of those books. And I was so pleasantly surprised at authors of books responding to me and accepting to jump on a quick call or to go for a coffee. And then I reached out to friends at, corporations, to friends at academic institutions, and then asked for introductions. Who should I talk to about these? The hunch that I had was that nature-based solutions should be a critical part of the battery of solutions that we have, that we should be protecting forests and restoring ecosystems to sequester carbon, and that we should make sure that we measure, monitor, and verify that carbon sequestration so that we can fund it effectively, and that we can help corporations and governments that do want to fund carbon sequestration by nature-based solutions do it right. So with that idea, I, again, spent a lot of time talking to experts. And after a long journey, there was a moment in which I was, okay, I think I'm ready. I'm going to start something. I found my co-founder, and we, in October of 2018, we incorporated Pachama as a corporation and started getting to work on it.
Fantastic story. And I'll say that I also, when I was breaking into trying to transition my career into climate tech, I similar thing where, I sent resumes into a number of organizations, startups, and didn't hear back. And now they're Climate Draft members. So, I think one thing to note is, we shouldn't trivialize, the whole thing with Climate Career Week is the climate community coming together to support people who are looking to make that career transition. That doesn't mean that it's that any career transition or any job search is easy. And it's emotionally fraught. There's lots of ups and downs and false starts. And I think, we're not here to sugarcoat that, but to say, if you have conviction and you persevere, that, those things aren't about you. Oftentimes, I remember I applied, as an aside, I applied to one a company that is now a Climate Draft member. And when I talked to the head of talent who started working with us, she mentioned that when she started, there had been nobody who was looking at the resume submissions in the ATS, and she had 1,000 sitting there. So it's funny at the time, you're like, oh, what is it about me that they're not hearing? But often it has nothing to do with you. So that's just to say for folks, solidarity and the emotional support and emotional resilience is part of this in addition to the resources. One thing, just to riff on what you said, like you got in, you started the company in 2018. You obviously were starting that transition and that research earlier than that. In 2023, I feel like the resources available, not to plug Climate Draft, but the climate draft exists today. It didn't exist when I was starting, obviously. But there's so many other resources and communities available. Ed will put our resources page for Climate Career Week in the chat where we've aggregated a lot of them. But can you talk about just, what you think is different today about the climate career transition than it was, when you were really pioneering it?
Yeah, no, 100%. And happy to comment on a few things you said, but we are in such a better place now. 4 years ago, I got weird looks every time that I would say that I wanted to start a climate company or a company to help solve climate change. And when I tried to recruit people, also I had similar, weird looks, right? People would be like, "Oh, wow, that, sounds very novel, but can you actually build a company with that? Are you going to be able to raise money?" So I think that now it has been proven that yes, you can build a company, and hopefully we are one example of many that are creating incredibly valuable businesses with solid business models that are actually resilient to these times in which everybody's constraining, and that you can have an impact, and that there are investors that want to invest in these companies, and that you don't have to sacrifice salary. That's something that I also want to make clear. Pachama is paying above market salaries for a Silicon Valley company in California, right? So, I think that today is a much better place. And I hope that this is just the beginning, because we need every job to be a climate job. We need everybody to be helping on this mission. So, and as you said, I don't want to ever, misrepresent to people the challenge that building a company with such a big mission represents. I actually put on Twitter last week, building anything is hard. Building a startup is very hard. Building a startup to help solve a big global challenge is very, very hard. And building a startup to solve a big global challenge, trying to bridge an old system to a new system is especially hard. And right now, we ourselves are finding it in the middle of a moment of controversy around carbon credits, actually a very necessary conversation about how do we improve the quality of carbon credits. But, it's not without challenges, being asked by so many people, "Oh, are you guys, doing things right?" Having to be, distracted by noise sometimes as we're building something that is already very hard. So, it's full of challenges, but guess what? Everything is hard. And this is something I learned in my previous startups, no matter what you're building, everything is hard. So I rather, be working on something hard, but important, hard, but worth it. And, regardless of the outcome, I think that the journey is also more satisfying.
Yeah, and actually, Christian from Watershed in our panel on Monday, I think he said, hard things are hard, but they, if they work, they have big payoffs, right? And I want to come back to, what you said about the funding environment and the business environment for climate tech companies, because I think that's really important. But before we get into that, let's talk about Pachama and what Pachama does, why it matters. I think it's ironic that, the controversy that you're talking about is basically what Pachama set out to solve. But obviously, when people are looking from the outside looking in, it's hard to parse within that. But why don't you start with, kind of what you're doing and all of the benefits to your approach?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, turns out that the largest carbon sink that we count with on the planet is forest and other natural ecosystems. Today, we are sequestering gigatons of carbon already via the growth of trees and other living beings, right, on natural ecosystems. And we continue to destroy that, right? It doesn't make any sense, but we continue to lose. We lost 100 million hectares, the size of Cuba, of tropical rainforest in 2021 alone. So humanity is at this crazy moment in which we need natural ecosystems to be removing carbon more than ever, and we continue destroying it. Meanwhile, there is an opportunity to restore. We have 2 billion hectares, the size of North America, that can be restored as forests, and in doing so, sequestering hundreds of gigatons in the next few decades. So it's been recognized by scientists, the UN, that nature-based solutions are a critical part of climate action, but it's been very hard until recently to, number one, measure, monitor, and validate the carbon sequestration of a specific project that is intervening on the land. So we wanted, number one, to help figure that part out. Today, humanity counts with hundreds of satellites orbiting the planet, collecting real-time, high-definition images of forest. And we have cloud computing that can support terabytes of data, as it was not possible before. And we have AI, deep learning and other machine learning models that can help us process that data, make predictions. So what Pachama does is using these technologies to help measure and give credit to those who sequester carbon through reforestation or conservation of natural ecosystems, and then issue carbon credits that can be used by corporations that, as they are investing in decarbonizing their operations, they need to take responsibility for the CO2 they put in the atmosphere. Now, the world of carbon credits is something that existed way before Pachama. It's been the first attempt at a carbon credit marketplace was in 1988. And then in the Kyoto Protocol, there was more, frameworks, but everything was done in a very manual, paper-based way. Until today, to verify a forest carbon project, you need to send someone to the field and measure trees with tapes. So in short, what Pachama is trying to do is to digitize the world of nature-based carbon credits all the way from the beginning of a project, the estimation of the carbon, the issuance of the credits, the go-to-market of these financial vehicles, which are the carbon credits, and the monitoring and reporting of the impact by corporations. It's a big vision. We still haven't completed the full platform that we imagine, but we're well on our way to do it. And, in relation to professionals looking to jump into climate, this is an example of a company that combines so many different disciplines: software engineering and artificial intelligence, but also geospatial data, marketplace, on the ground operations, commercialization, partnerships, and so forth, right? So while we do need a few very good scientists that have experience in climate and carbon, actually we employ a lot of people from companies that had nothing to do with climate because the skills apply to what we're building.
Yeah, and that's a great point that we often make, which is, the scientific problems absolutely need to be solved, but bringing those solutions to market are often business problems, right? And if it's not to abuse the trees behind me, but the proverbial tree falling in the woods, if you have a great solution, a great innovation, and nobody's using it, it doesn't have an impact on stemming climate change. So the people who can help bring these innovations to market, to get them adopted as broadly and as quickly as possible, as John Doerr says, the speed and scale, right?
Correct.
They're actually, the difference makers. They can be the difference makers in kind of how far we go towards planetary boundaries. And one quick note that I've always found interesting and really impressive about Pachama's mission and what you're doing is that, carbon removal is one thing. We just actually this morning had a CDR showcase with more mechanical focused CDR, some weatherization and things like that. But what you're doing, in addition to the carbon removal benefit, it has other benefits as well.
Yeah, indeed. And this is something I try to remind people. We're not only on a climate crisis, we are on a biodiversity crisis. The collapse of biodiversity is going to have big consequences for the planet and for humanity because everything is interconnected, right? So we need the bees to pollinize the fruit trees to produce the food that we eat, right? And, in addition to biodiversity, water, air, all systems are interconnected. So we're in a planetary environmental crisis that need to be solved with solutions that are synergistic. So in that sense, protecting and restoring nature, as simple as it sounds, is actually a solution that can address those crises in addition to climate justice. Because unfortunately, the communities of the global south, where I come from, are going to pay the biggest bill, even though they were the ones that emitted less carbon. So this is also a mechanism to drive funding to the global south, creating bioeconomies that are that can help lift people out of poverty by restoring nature and solving climate change.
Yeah, and it's also changing the economic incentives around deforestation and clear cutting for farming, for cattle. You're basically, climate change is a human created problem. It's a result of our economic system. So the economic impact that you're having is kind of also addressing some of the root causes of the issue.
Indeed. I mean, today we are in a system that doesn't put a value to environmental services, doesn't put a value to the carbon that is sequestered by natural ecosystems. And that's why it makes economic sense to destroy a forest, to extract, timber or just to put cattle to, make beef that's going to sell as a $1 burger in the future, right? Because we're not putting value to the other service that this forest was providing.
Yeah, 100%. So then going back to some of what you said before about, the questions and the, how skeptical people were of your desire back in 2017, 2018 to start a venture-backed climate tech company, right? You know very well that venture-backed startups are a very specific business model. They have really high economic returns. Venture investors need to return money to their bosses, their LPs. They are only looking to place bets that they think can return 100 times what they put in. So why, there were lots of ways that you could personally have an impact on climate. Why did you choose, after all of your exploration, to say, like, I believe that I should build a venture-backed startup in this space?
To be honest, at the beginning, I didn't know whether this was going to be a venture-backed business. And a friend of mine was reminding me the other day that I said at the beginning, Pachama is not going to have more than 20 employees. We're going to be a small shop making, cool tech, and we're probably going to bootstrap it, right? But I think that over time, I gained in conviction that, wow, if we could help drive hundreds of billions of dollars from point A to point B, right? From polluters to carbon sequestration, and we are the platform that helps drive that, wealth, then, wow, you can actually build a really valuable company. The same way that Airbnb managed to, connect a marketplace from supply and demand, Amazon, Zillow, so many other companies, right? So, I mean, I think that having spent 10 years in Silicon Valley helped me have a library of business models, right, that you could apply to build something that has that scale. And frankly, it's what we need to, as you said, solve it with in the time that we have, with speed and scale. So I think that, in fact, we need much more, many more people thinking with the scalability mindset that Silicon Valley has applied so well to many other industries, thinking about solutions and problems that can be solved with technology for climate change. So I do think that not every climate project has to be a venture-backed company. In fact, there's many other sources of financing from governments, the IRA, right? And in Europe, there's so much funding for climate solutions to, other forms of financing. But I do think that there's a great opportunity to keep building venture-type companies.
Yes, that's a great point. There are more funding models available today than at any point, before. Climate Draft is not a venture-backed company. And, there's great revenue-based solutions out there, revenue-based financing solutions, especially for climate. Ed can put, I think it's Enduring Planet in the chat. That's a climate-focused revenue-based financing solution. And like you said, the amount of grant money and government funding that's come through the IRA, and we'll probably see competitive stuff happening in Europe and around the world. We're still figuring, I know we're all still figuring out where, how much and where all that's going, but there's a lot of opportunities. But on the, you did choose a venture-backed model. You've raised, I think, announced $79 million in funding total as of last May with the $55 million Series B. A lot of people kind of say, oh, okay, there's climate funds now, and they're mission driven, and maybe their LPs are mission driven. You've raised from some of the top climate funds out there, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Lower Carbon, so Bill Gates and Chris Sacca. But you've also raised money from non-climate VCs who have limited partners, they're investors who are not giving them money to make an impact. They're giving them money to make returns. Can you talk a little bit about why generalist venture capitalists are finding Pachama specifically and climate tech in general an attractive investment space?
Yeah, it's been great to work with so many funds whose mandate is to invest in climate companies, because it just save a lot of time, because they already did their research, right? And they already know how big this opportunity is. But it's been surprising and amazing to see, as you said, so many generalist VCs. I would say that probably every VC right now has at least one partner who's interested in climate tech. And, some of them are actually creating sub funds to invest in climate tech. And I think the reason is because they see that climate, this is something that Mark Cannon said, but climate change requires a transformation of the scale of the industrial revolution at the speed of the digital revolution. So we're talking about a civilizational shift. Every industry, every vertical will have to be innovated on the light of climate, decarbonizing, seeing ways in which any human activity can actually be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So we're talking about an enormous potential creation of wealth. And this is what investors see. And I think it's great that they are investing. Now, I do want to say that I always try to tell generalist investors that these have to be longer term investments. This is not a 5-year flip, we're going to, sell a company or quickly IPO. Generally, it's going to take longer for these companies to reach their full potential. But I think the best investors actually know that these are the best companies, the ones that take longer but create much bigger outcomes.
Absolutely. And, I know Chris Sacca talks about how comparing his history of, internet investing to now his time in climate investing. And while on the one hand, yes, there may not be a Google or a Facebook or a Salesforce that's ready to gobble you up the minute that you start showing some traction, like a lot of software companies have seen. On the climate side, there's real money being made much more quickly generally than in a lot of software businesses that were running at a loss for many years, or being basically subsidizing their product with funding, as anybody who's taken an Uber since they've IPO'd has felt. So it's I think maybe you could talk about this a little bit, but like you have real customers. This isn't something where you're just building. If you build it, they will come. You have some of the biggest companies in the world as your customers. There's a real value that is being economic value that's being assigned to what you're doing.
Yes, indeed. I can't disclose details, but we have, we are in the tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and we are growing fast. And we are serving some of the most respected Fortune 500 companies in the world, because we found a way to solve a problem for them, and we found a way to unlock part of the solution on the supply side of an industry that needs to exist, needs to improve. And yes, it's full of challenges, as we were discussing before, that precisely because of that, it needs new eyes, it needs innovation and technological tools to actually work at scale. But you're right. I mean, I see so many other companies that already are scaling on revenue. And then there are others that won't have revenue for a long time because they're more, it's more like a technical innovation, like a science and deep tech type of innovation and breakthrough that they need to make. Some of them won't work, but I think that that's why it's important for investors to have a portfolio of companies, but we need to try a lot of different things.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're the session right before this was a showcase of nuclear companies, and so talk about time to market. It's a lot of these folks. They're still in the prototype stage, many years in, but if they solve it, it's game changing both from a climate perspective as well as from an investment returns perspective. So you're the CEO. You've built this team. You referenced this a little bit before, right? You have scientists. You need people with specific domain expertise. But can you talk a bit about not just the diversity of the types of functions that you have, but also the value that you see from people coming from different industry backgrounds, and what kind of that cross pollination does for the team?
Yes, 100%. Today we have hired people from the likes of Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, to people from NASA, SpaceX, and other space technology industries. We hire people from the Nature Conservancy. We hire people from some of the legacy carbon bodies and companies, and we hire people from 15 different countries. We decided to be remote for a number of reasons, but I also believe that this needed to be a global company with using the full talent of humanity to build it. Today we have team members in England, Austria, Spain, Portugal, Australia, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, and so forth. And I think that also brings a very diverse set of perspectives. I love the magic that happens when you bring people from different industries, different countries, different cultures. There is a creativity that you cannot get if everybody looks and comes from the same place. Now, as I said, it's not without challenges, right? To build a remote team and to build a multidisciplinary team. And that's why for us it was very important to be very intentional and clear about our purpose, our mission, and our values. And every meeting, my team is already probably tired of me repeating every meeting, our mission, our values. Every board meeting, which we just had one, I start with purpose, mission, values, and then I go down to strategy and metrics and so forth, right? But I think that having a common North Star, common values that regardless of the culture you can embrace, is very powerful.
100%. And just because I think this is a practical question for a lot of people. When you're hiring for a software engineering role, an accounting role, HR role, whatever it is, how much climate knowledge are you screening for in those types of hires versus what they can learn on the job from all of their colleagues who are specialists in that?
When I interview candidates, and I continue interviewing every candidate, but I do ask them a little bit about our market and Pachama. I'm just trying to see whether they did the homework of reading a little bit and researching a little bit about us. But and I do expect that they will have an intelligent opinion or read of what we do and why. But of course, I don't expect anybody to be an expert. I guess unless we're hiring you for being an expert, right? But by the most part, yes, I think that not having any knowledge, any experience on climate science, carbon, nature is not at all, a problem for working at Pachama. And in fact, as I said, I do think that sometimes the outsider view is exactly what you need to bring innovations.
Fantastic. And so as somebody who went through this transition, you welcome a lot of people who have come from tech, and Pachama is kind of a little bit of a gateway drug, if you will, for a lot of people from tech, because there is so much cross applicability of software engineering and marketing and product management and design. So I know you've seen a lot of people who've made the career transition over the last several years. What, if any, advice do you have for folks who are on that side looking at the career transition today?
Yes, we had more than 15,000 people applied to work at Pachama. I haven't checked the last number, but a few months ago it was 15,000 people. Many came through Climate Draft and Work on Climate and Terra.do and my climate journey. So you guys are doing a really good job. And we have hired 85 people coming from, again, so many different industries. I guess my advice would be reach out to people, get mentors and sponsors who have done it or who are in the other side, who can give you ideas, companies that you could look at, books that you could read, and so forth. Again, that's what I did 4 years ago. I reached out to a lot of people, and people were very generous with their time, especially if you want to just contribute, right? And trust your value. We all have something important, unique, and valuable to contribute, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from. So try to seek within yourself, what is that? Another interview question I have is, what is your superpower, right? Because we all have a superpower. And it might not look, evident that it can be useful in climate, but I'm sure that we can use all talents that humanity has. And then just don't give up, as you said at the beginning, right? If you really want it, you gotta try and persist. You have to apply to a lot of companies. You have to do the work of, finding that fit, right? And I also see, I think you also have to be willing to sacrifice something, right? I mean, again, I said at the beginning that we try to pay fair salary, but we still cannot compete with the big tech companies, right? And we had instances in which a candidate would just, was not willing to sacrifice on salary, right? So, I mean, you had to make a sacrifice, which again, over the long term might not be so, right? And then just read, there's a bunch of books now, papers, and so many ideas out there. If you're exploring starting a project, I always like to read things from at least 3 different disciplines that are adjacent to the problem that I'm looking at, because from this mix of fields is where ideas come from, right? So again, Pachama, it was a combination of reading about the state of satellites, the state of artificial intelligence, the problems in carbon markets, right? And I guess biology, right? So from the intersections of different areas of technology where things are moving quickly, you can come up with new ideas and new opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it brings to mind, as an analogy, I read about during the pandemic, there was a whole bunch of uncertainty and frankly, scientific error about whether or not COVID was airborne. And when they finally, traced where it went to, where it stemmed from, it was a lack of communication between basically the physicists who understood fluid dynamics of what is an aerosol, and then how the definitions in medical textbook, the epidemiology, had been appropriated from that but they were not actually talking. And so that's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. But it was just a great example of, oh my goodness, this is as simple as two people, who are experts in their respective fields aren't talking to each other, and at that intersection that matters. And so I think that is an excellent point. And I also want to talk a little bit about the compensation subject that you brought up. So, this was something that we've talked about throughout the week so far. And I think you mentioned Pachama pays above market for a comparable startup of a similar stage. Often the question of compensation is not about climate versus non-climate, it's about stage. And a lot of people who are leaving big tech wouldn't necessarily consider going to a non-climate startup, so they've never entertained that issue. And climate is new. So as I think Cody Sims said in our opening, there's not a lot of Googles yet in climate. There will be, maybe bigger. But today, your opportunities are going to be at companies that there's a few public companies, there's a few companies that are almost public, but a lot of them are, like Pachama, very well capitalized, able to pay great market rates, and have, I would argue, equity compensation that's more interesting in climate today, going back to why are all these generalist investors taking money that they would be putting into a software company and putting into a climate company? Well, they're seeing that the return on investment over the next 10 years might look better in climate than in software. So the equity that you get when you're joining a startup is basically you're making a similar investment to a venture investor. So, but yeah, I think it's important to emphasize to people, yes, you're not going to get paid what you would make at a public company, but this isn't just about altruism. These are big businesses. Anything else you'd want to add on the comp subject?
I saw someone on Twitter saying that people used to think that having a job at a big tech company was the safest thing that you could do. But with all the layoffs, you're seeing that nothing is safe, right? So I think that, again, joining a startup has a level of risk, and cutting your salary is something that, has an impact on your life. But I think that overall, it is an incredible opportunity for people to be able to join a company with such important missions, get paid well, and get to build the company to a success that then you can be part of and share of, with equity and with the increased economics that the company can achieve in the future.
Yeah, and you're, like you said, everything's a risk. So take a risk for something that has both financial upside and personal fulfillment while you're doing it, is, I think, a great pitch. Also, you touched on connecting with people, mentorship, one-on-one. A quick plug for the Climate Career Week office hours that are happening this Friday. So if you haven't signed up and you're attending, please do. We'll be connecting you for chats with folks who are working in the industry already. And then there's also some great ongoing resources around mentorship and connecting. Work on Climate, a great free Slack community. They have expert office hours. MCJ, another great community that is membership based community, also has office hours and AMAs. And then there's this open door climate movement that is happening on LinkedIn. Kind of search for that hashtag. So that's all aggregated on the resources page. And there's just lots of people, even more so than when I started in this journey a couple of years ago, and even more so than when Diego started before me. There are so many more people to meet who are here to welcome you, to help give you advice, give you their opinions. And also want to emphasize what Diego said, focus on your superpower, focus on what you have to bring. You're bringing something from the outside in that's valuable. For me, the way I started getting into climate was I know about early stage fundraising, nothing to do with climate, but I just know how to have a lot of painful experience fundraising for startups. And so I started talking to early stage climate founders, trading effectively my advice on fundraising for learning from them about what they were doing in the space. So with that, I think we can segue into, we have a few minutes left for some audience questions. I'm not going to favor Ivan, but he's my former colleague, and also a fellow Porteño. Ivan asked, as you look at the talent landscape in your space, what do you see as the biggest gaps and opportunities? What kind of functions do we not have enough of in climate?
I would say software engineers, to be honest. I mean, we need everything, but software engineers is, of course, one of the most competed talent type in tech. And so we need more software engineers in general. We need more machine learning engineers in particular, which again is also going to be super competitive. But frankly, everything. There were other questions about design and marketing. Yes, we need this type of roles that probably wasn't obvious that you needed for a climate company, but we need to tell amazing stories. We need to deeply understand users, and we need to bring, as you said earlier, great technological breakthroughs into the market in a way that is accepted. Climate change, a mentor of mine told me, climate change is easy, people are hard, right? So climate change is a human problem. It's a systems problem as much as it is a technological and science problem.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, it's building businesses, right? Building software and products that people will use, and you can kind of get them to use it in the way you want. It's the same problem regardless of the domain, and kind of the same craft regardless of the domain. There was a good softball question in here earlier. I'm trying to find about kind of the completed projects and the positive. What kind of, from Josu? Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. What kind of impact have you seen on the flora and fauna when finishing a Pachama reforestation project?
Yeah, I mean, it's early for us, and forests take a long time to grow and regenerate. But we're seeing already incredible things from the field. One of our projects has a camera trap, and recently a jaguar showed up in the camera trap. It was so cool for our team to see that jaguar. And then on the reforestation projects that we started our first reforestation a year and a half ago. We are already seeing the growth of those plants. We're already seeing birds that are coming back. And again, this is what we get reported from the people on the ground. So it's amazing to see how quickly nature can come back, and it's very satisfying to see.
That's got to be amazing. All right, and there was another kind of a harder hitting question. Andrea, many believe that for companies, especially oil and gas, to be serious about tackling climate change, they need to stop carbon emissions from getting into the atmosphere in the first place, and that credits don't work in the long term. What's your opinion on this? Before you go in, I'll just set it up with saying, like, it is pretty much established science at this point that if we stopped emitting today, went to zero incremental emissions today, we would still cross into dangerous warming. And so it's not a question of either or. It is established science at this point that it needs to be both. But Diego, obviously, you have a specific, unique perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been established that, of course, we need to move away from fossil fuels. Unfortunately, if we are realistic about it, it's not going to happen right away. There's so much infrastructure that still depends. Like I'm here in Argentina, I see all these gas cars. In Argentina, still there is no electric cars. These gas cars still going to have 20 years of life in poor countries where you cannot immediately electrify transportation. That's just one example of the momentum that a fossil fuel-based economy at a global scale has, and the transition that will take from moving away from fossil fuels. But as you said, even if by a magic wand we were to stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, we still need to remove carbon. We still need to protect and restore ecosystems if we want to have a livable planet for the future. And who has to take responsibility for that CO2? Well, those who actually put the CO2 in the atmosphere. So we actually have to make companies accountable for both, for measuring and reducing as fast and as decidedly as possible, but also for removing CO2, for compensating their footprint by removing carbon, avoiding emissions from deforestation and other mechanisms that exist out there. And yes, I mean, just to answer a few other questions out there, it is a market with issues, and we never shied away from that. In fact, that's why we started the company, to put these technologies, these tools at the service of making it work in the future. And there is a lot of groups, it's not just us, who are working to make carbon offsetting, carbon markets, carbon removal work well, with integrity, with transparency. It's not easy, but I think that, as the perennial saying says, let's not throw the baby with the bathwater. There is a huge potential to make it work well, and we welcome more people with solutions, not just pointing at problems. And another quick answer here to someone who's asking about the name Pachama and how indigenous communities would feel. Well, I am a descendant of indigenous people. My two grandmothers are descendants of indigenous people of South America from the Incas. And yes, I wanted to honor the goddess of Pachamama, Mother Earth, who my people have and continue to worship, believing that Earth is alive, that Earth has a spirit, that Earth is a source of our food, the source of our life. And, you know, of course, you know, it's something that we take with a lot of seriousness.
And I'll just note to the other part of that question, you know, we touched on it a little bit before, but I know, you know, from other interviews you've given and other discussions from the very beginning, economic development, you know, that basically restoring economic justice, of bringing the value of stewardship back to the communities that are actually responsible for the land, having them get recognized for that, helping to hopefully compensate a little bit for the costs that they're going to bear, you know, having not been emitters. That is very core to, you know, how you all have approached developing projects. Maybe we can spend a minute, you know, we're short on time, but I would love to just hear about, you know, how you work with those communities, and an example or two of how the projects, you know, benefit them.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the drivers of deforestation in the global south, in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Indonesia, Congo, are economic, right? So either governments give concessions to communities or to companies to clear the forest, to do agriculture and extract timber and extract other minerals from the ground. If we don't give an economic alternative to that, we will exploit it under the current economic paradigm that humanity lives on. So we have to be very realistic about that. And then there is also illegal deforestation, and illegal deforestation by, you know, gangs, literal gangs that show up with guns in the Amazon rainforest, you know, attacking indigenous people. They need to be combated, and that combat needs to be funded, right? We need to enable local governments and local communities to be able to push back, to surveil, and to, you know, have rangers that actually avoid this illegal deforestation. If we don't give a value to the carbon and to the environmental ecosystem services that are provided, then it's not going to happen. And then the same with reforestation. If we don't create incentives to plant native forests that will grow fast and stay there for a long time, it's not going to happen. So, you know, we need carbon finance to make all this happen. And as you said, in doing so, we have to ensure that the benefits trickle down to the communities, to the people in the ground, to the indigenous communities who have been there for thousands of years. and to do it in a just and transparent way.
Yeah, and I think that also touches on Raimundo had a question about kind of just shifting where deforestation is happening. And so I think Raimundo's question was more about, hey, can you evaluate that this project didn't move there? But I think what you're saying is, again, it's systems change. It's about altering the incentive structure so that the people, the avoidance of deforestation, the incentives to reforestation are global. It's not just about one specific project where you're involved.
Indeed, it's a global problem and a global solution.
All right, we are almost at time. I'll give you one quick last question because I got a lot of upvotes. Obviously, you've been through YC twice. This isn't about Pachama or climate specifically, but people are curious about YC. Any tips or like how much traction did you need to get into YC? How much? What was your MVP like?
Yeah,
and that'll be our last question.
Yeah, to be 100% honest, so I knew Gustav, one of the YC partners from before, because I did YC with my previous company. So when I was in this moment of imposter syndrome, I went to Gustav. I told him, dude, I'm exploring this idea. Am I crazy? And he told me, I think it's great. Get started, find a co-founder, build an MVP, and apply to YC. And we did that. And we got into YC with the MVP was frankly a website where you could, click a button and say, I want to buy carbon credits from this project. And then in the other side, of course, we had contacted projects that could sell carbon credits, and we were doing a basic satellite-based assessment of these projects. What we wanted to prove is that there was a demand for validated, verified carbon credits from forest projects. And YC was game-changing, to be honest. They introduced us to Chris Aka, who then invested in the company. And that was a snowball that got us to the Series B. I love that community, really good people, very, very helpful. And now there are more than 100 climate companies that went through YC, and they want more. So yeah, if you're a founder, do apply to YC. At the same time, I always say you don't need YC. You can be successful with or without an accelerator. But if you can get into it, it's a great community.
Diego, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for attending. We really appreciate you being here.